Hi, everybody. I hope that everyone can hear me okay. Welcome to ParentGood. My name is Joanie Levine. I am a board certified behavior analyst. And, ParentGood has actually been a really great opportunity for me to work with all sorts of different families and kids, and, anywhere from small children to teenagers and their parents. It's been really great getting to know everybody and working across the entire spectrum of people who might need a little bit of help from the behavioral perspective. So, today's talk is going to be about navigating big emotions. And because I am, kind of addressing it from that behavioral side, it's going to focus on behavior and the environment and how that will, relate back to emotions and what we can do to help our kids when they have those bigger reactions. So I'm going to kind of fit a lot of information here into about 30 minutes, and that's why we will keep the second half open for questions, because it'll probably have some things come up. It'll be a lot of info thrown at you the first half. So when the questions come up at the end, you can either type them out or you can unmute yourself, I believe, and then we can get started on the questions the second half. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is emotions relating to behavior in the environment. And so we like, families and teachers and anybody that works with kids and has kids to be aware of something called ABC. So that's antecedent, behavior, and consequence. And so whenever we are looking at a behavior, whether, and in this case, we can talk about those big emotional reactions, whether it's a tantrum or just maybe something that seems like a little bit of an overreaction to something. The ABCs would be, the A is the antecedent, so that is the antecedent setting event. So what happened before the behavior? And sometimes people call these, triggers, those things that kind of get somebody riled up more times than not. And these also have to do with what we call a history of reinforcement. So if an event or a trigger or just, somebody saying something a certain way, if that has upset somebody in the past, it's probably more likely to, have that effect again in the future. So we want to watch for those setting events and those things that happen before a behavior, so we could help identify, maybe what's lying behind a big emotional reaction. And then, so that's the A of the ABC. And then the B is the behavior. So just what's happening. So they're in that setting event. Somebody says something to them in a certain way. A lot of times with kids, when we're talking about tantrums and things like that, they're probably told no when they're asking for something, or, they're told to, there's a demand placed on them. They're told to clean up their room. So the B is that behavior. So what are we seeing? What is their reaction? So, that crying, that screaming, anything that's coming out. So that's the middle part. And believe it or not, that's probably the least important thing to really think about, because what we can actually do as the environment of these kids is we can affect the A, the beforehand stuff, and we can affect the C, the consequence. And consequence in this case does not mean punishment. It does not mean, timeout, things like that. It just means anything that happens after the behavior. So sometimes when a child engages in, any kind of behavior, whether it's a tantrum or something else, our consequence could be reinforcing the behavior. And that doesn't mean we're trying to reward it in any way. It just means that whatever we are doing can be influencing whether it is more likely to happen in the future. So even when you are waiting out some kind of big emotional episode with your child, like a tantrum, at whatever point that you end up reacting, that is kind of the point that the child has now learned, whether they're, consciously aware of it or not, of that's what's more likely to happen in the future. So even if you wait out till that peak, if you just can't handle it anymore and you're like, okay, fine, you can have that snack or that candy, or okay, fine, you don't have to clean your room. The farther along you let that behavior get, the more, likely it is that it gets to that point in the future. So that's why we really want to address those antecedents, those things that happen prior I'm a big believer in doing anything we can on that front end of behavior so that we can try to avoid it and limit it getting to that really intense point. But obviously, we do have to focus on that consequence as well and that reaction. And so, the next thing that we can kind of talk about is how can we actually try to help and do something about this ABC, this what comes before, what comes after of behavior. And a really important part of that, especially working in behavior analysis, is that we identify the function of the behavior, the motivation behind the behavior. So we want to make sure that we are matching the motivation behind the behavior to what we try to do to help, because I'm not going to sit here and, give you a cookie cutter approach for each one of your children. That's not really the best way to do things. It's, we can give general tips, and I will definitely be doing that towards the end of this presentation. But the important thing to know is that, every child is different, every situation is different. Even with the same child, they can exhibit all these different behaviors that maybe have different motivations. And so we need to address each one of those separately and make sure that the things that we are doing before and after the behavior match that motivation. So we don't want to, react to a child who is, doing something for attention. We don't want to then, remove some kind of tangible reward as if that was what they were needing or wanting at the time. We have to address that attention component. So we have to make sure, it all matches. And the way that we do that is, we kind of just look at each behavior individually, and we try to identify based on, certain questions and scenarios and situations, when is the most likely time that the child will engage in that behavior. So I'm sure a lot of you have children that engage in some kind of tantrum behavior. And so, each person out there, though, might have a child that it's for a totally different reason. So one of you might be nodding your heads when I'm talking about, being told no and any kind of denial or transition in their day. And then somebody else might be like, oh, nope, it's only about, attention, or it's only about getting out of when I tell them to, clean up or do their homework or something. So there's all different reasons. And so we ask questions like, does the behavior occur when you take something away? Does the behavior occur following a request to perform something difficult? Does the behavior occur when you are, speaking to somebody else in the room? And that's when that whole divided attention thing comes up, and we want to address, okay, what can we do to help the child tolerate and deal with somebody speaking to somebody else and having attention, be off of them. And, so that's kind of where the functions come in, and we really want to identify why those big emotional reactions are happening before we try to just jump in, with an answer. And the next thing is, does the child have the skills to tolerate, whatever we're expecting them to not react so emotionally to? So that psychological flexibility, that emotional regulation, we want to make sure we are identifying if this kind of deficit in their behavior and in their, ability to react appropriately, is it a can't do thing, or is it a won't do thing? So, I'm sure a lot of people are probably right when they assume that their child is choosing, to react a certain way, or, choosing to refuse to clean their room and then, have some kind of big reaction about it. But a lot of people are probably also nodding their heads that, maybe they just can't seem to regulate. And so that's where we want to start off too, is we don't want to have too high of expectations. We want to make sure if there is a skill deficit that we are actually able to address that and work on it before we're expecting, a skill to come out of a child that's just not there yet. It's not really their fault because they don't have that replacement behavior or that reaction that we're looking for. It's just not in their repertoire yet. And so we can work to teach that. And so in terms of psychological flexibility, the different things we're looking at is the child aware of and listening to what is happening around them? Do they tend to define themselves as bad when they engage in inappropriate behavior? And, these are all things that based on how they kind of think about themselves and their environment, and if they're even able to grasp certain concepts, psychologically, and, having that flexibility, that'll determine if we can identify whether it's just a big reaction coming out of nowhere, or is it, something that they can control or not, or, are they even able to think about these concepts, no matter what age they are. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes we might try to see if the child reports changes in their body at times that they're kind of feeling angry, or, going through those emotional reactions. So, are they feeling some kind of pressure or temperature change? Like, are they identifying these things that they can, then use in the future when they're feeling these emotional reactions? Okay, let me take a step back. I'm feeling myself getting kind of hot. I feel my heart racing a little bit. Are they able to identify those things that happened before, or is it a skill that is not yet there that we need to kind of work on and help them to identify? Does the child report that their thoughts and feelings are actually true despite contrary evidence? So, depending on age and depending on just, development and different things in the environment, are they able to, identify whether something that they think might actually not be true, or a perception that they have, might actually be contrary to what's really happening, at a young age. That's a really hard differentiation to make. And then the last one I was just going to touch on is when a situation is challenging, the child appears to give up or stop trying quickly. So we also, once again, depending on age and just tolerance and things like that, are they able to, stop themselves and stop and think at all? Or are they just going to get to that point and they're just not able to, even try to think about it from the beginning anyway? And we just want to make sure that we're identifying whether, the child thinks that they can control their behaviors or not, because we need to start there so that we're not just expecting them to stop out of nowhere when it might not be possible for them. The next thing, I know we're going kind of fast here. We only got a little bit of time, but I'm hoping I'm giving some good information. So I'm just kind of going through, this outline here of hopefully some helpful stuff for you guys. And then, like we said, there can be questions at the end. So the next thing I wanted to touch on is generalization and maintenance. So when we are working with our children to, kind of regulate their emotions, working on those coping skills, those calm down strategies, that breathing, that counting, whatever works for your individual child. Maybe it's sitting down and talking about the situation after, whatever it may be. We want to make sure that those skills that they're learning are able to generalize into different settings, and not only different settings, but with different people. So we want to make sure that, okay, maybe mom is doing a really good job having this child do, breathing techniques or things like that at home. But then we want to make sure that when they're in school and something might, kind of set them off, that they're able to also use those skills there, even out in the community. So, we're talking about teachers, we're talking about other relatives, and even something that might not be thought of, we're talking about strangers too. So if they're in a store and, someone down the aisle does something that, irritates them in some way, we want to make sure that those skills of not reacting so big are kind of generalizing to everybody, even people that they don't know personally. And it's important that you as caregivers are aware of the importance of generalization and kind of maintaining these skills, because you are the ones that are with them most of the time. So, you might do a session with somebody like me, or, a mental health counselor, once a week, or they may, see their school psychologist or somebody like that. But the reality is you as caregivers are the ones having the most influence, and, helping them to maintain those skills throughout their world. So, the other thing with generalization is that we want the responses to generalize too. So, it kind of shows mastery of a skill when a child is able to kind of initiate a new response. So maybe they're taught only a breathing technique with their parents at home, but they somehow get to school, and a teacher or somebody in the classroom sees them, counting quietly to themselves. So just that response, that behavior that they're doing, once that starts to generalize, that really shows some control on the child's end, and that they're really understanding that coping mechanism, and that, okay, I don't have to do it exactly this way. I can do it this other way. And so once we see them start to do that themselves, that's really important, and that shows that control and that ability to react in those situations maybe a little differently. So like we're talking about, we want everything to be as individualized as possible. And I'm gonna definitely read those questions in a few minutes at the end, to address those. I'll go through, and then we can take the mics off as well. So don't worry, I will read those in a few minutes to get to some individualized, maybe some answers to some questions. So what we're saying is that we want things to be, as individualized as possible with our interventions, but we can still, kind of give you some tips in general of what can you try at home. And this will be more on kind of like a lesson perspective. So what can you do with your child to kind of teach them some different skills, and how to identify certain, emotional regulation type things. So this isn't really interventions in terms of like, if I were to work with the family one-on-one, I might say, okay, we need to work on not reacting so strongly and arguing with the child, because that's kind of, reinforcing that behavior. But here, without, knowing everybody's situation, I can kind of give you some of those social skill lessons. So the first thing that I was going to kind of bring up is matching the size of the reaction to the size of the problem. And we do want to be careful with this, because we want to make sure we're not telling our kids that they're wrong for feeling a certain way. We want to make sure their feelings are validated, but we also want to make sure that they're able to, slowly kind of identify, okay, in that moment, maybe that was way too much. And the extremes are kind of what we're looking at here. If a younger child gets upset about something that we think may be too big of a reaction, there's always that they might grow out of it type thing if they're very young. But if it's an older kid, and they're having those really strong emotions to those smaller problems, we do want to make sure that they're aware that we can teach them to kind of control and match those situations a little better. So for younger kids, sometimes, we just have a little visual like this. And ParentGood let me know that maybe someday I'll be able to share some kind of presentation with you guys, but for today I have paper. So this just says, do they match? So the size of the problem, the size of the reaction. So we want to make sure, this is obviously something simple maybe for a younger child, but, if we're talking to them about something that happened, okay, what made you so upset? And if it was that, their brother looked at them funny. So, okay, where does that fall on the size of the problem? It's not all the way up here. It's probably more down here. And so your reaction, when you fell to the floor and started screaming and, punching the couch, it was kind of up here. And even though it looks simple, it is, like I said, kind of a higher level kind of lesson, only because we do want to be careful about really listening to our kids' feelings. So the important thing with this is that we're going to treat it as a lesson. So we're going to try to do it outside of the situation. So, we can make it fun. We can do it after dinner. We can do colorful things and talk about it and make it kind of a positive thing. And, without jumping in the moment and, kind of reprimanding them, saying, where did this fall? We want to do it more as like one of those antecedent strategies to try to, just teach them that skill to have for when it does happen. And then I know we've been talking a lot about younger children. I'm sure there's parents on here with maybe some teenagers or, some kids on the older range. So I did want to just touch on kind of an alternative to that. It's just like kind of a higher level visual. So we have some kids that, I don't know if we can really see this here, but I'll just kind of show you. So the situation and the response, the situation might be all the way down here at number 2. So down, at the lower level, that, somebody's being irritating, you're not getting what you want, someone is being rude or mean to you. So like these are maybe words that, somebody in high school might use or middle school, that somebody is just, bothering them in some way. So that's down here at number 2. But say that same kid that's describing that is reacting somewhere up here, which says something like, violence, fighting, attacking, recklessly destroying things. And so that's like a number 9 response. So like I said, this is kind of a higher level way of looking at it for some older kids. But, that violence and that recklessness, that is all the way up here with, you or someone you love is in immediate, risk of injury or death or something like that. So obviously, we've all had big reactions about things. We're not saying that they're never appropriate, but if you're having those really big, yelling and kind of violent type things, when it's something at that lower level, it's just kind of, kind of just a visual for some older kids as well, that you can just kind of, if you were to draw this out with your kid or something, you can put your own little situations in there. And then just to give an example real quick of like kind of what goes together, we would say, if something like an important goal, so say again for a kid in high school, an important goal of theirs is somehow blocked, and they're feeling, really frustrated and upset. And up here at number 5 and 6, it's saying that it's going to affect them 6 months from now, then we can understand, this actually is a big problem. It's not just something that's going to go away by tomorrow morning. It's something very upsetting to them. So it's understandable if right across from number 6 in the response, we have, they're fixating on it. They're physically distraught. They might even be yelling a little bit. And we can kind of understand that that's, a bigger problem and a bigger deal. But just to kind of, have those visuals for different age kids sometimes can help. And like I said, we want to make sure that we're treating it as a lesson. We're not, throwing this in a kid's face when they're in some kind of emotional crisis. And the biggest takeaway that I can kind of give is that we're practicing these skills. So maybe we're talking about the situations where we're teaching those calm down strategies, like breathing and counting. We're making sure to practice when a child is not escalated, because that will not only help them to grasp the information better, but you won't have that risk of invalidating their emotions. You won't have them feeling wrong for feeling a certain way, because we want to just kind of, we want to make sure we're kind of on that fine line of acknowledging their emotions, but then also helping them to learn to have some of that control when it is getting very intense like that. And like I said, we can make those lessons fun. You can do them at the dinner table with these colorful, silly visuals. And I just wanted to touch real quick on, in that sense, also when you're having these lessons, just a general quick note on pairing things with reinforcement. So in general, when you are trying to have a kid be engaged with either, a lesson in school, some homework, even a certain person. So say a new babysitter comes over, or they're working with somebody new like me, we always try to pair with reinforcement. And that means we want them to associate us or the lesson, whatever it is that we want to be fun, with those good things. So, you can have these types of lessons, with a favorite snack, with some like silly role playing type stuff. And then just in general, this will, encourage them talking to you more, because they kind of associate, sitting down and talking to you about maybe these harder topics with something positive, and it kind of just makes that association that, okay, like this isn't so bad, and it might even be enjoyable to do this type of lesson or work on these skills as a family. And this will kind of help us with those positive, more happy interactions in the home in general. And so that's always just a good thing to kind of end on, is making sure that whatever you're trying to accomplish is paired with those good things. So it's not coming off as, you must do this. You're just, you're laying down the law. You want to make sure that they're receiving it in kind of a positive, better way. And because I have a couple minutes here before we reach that half-hour mark, and then I'll start asking questions or answering questions, I'm sorry. I figured that since I do have a second, I can kind of touch on theory of mind, which is kind of a perspective skill. And just to give you a quick background, just as like another thing to keep in mind for when we're identifying if our kids can even, if they even have that skill to react appropriately. We want to make sure that they're at a point where they can kind of take the perspective of other people. So, it might actually be expecting too much of a small child to, if you start trying to talk to them, maybe in a little bit of an older sense, saying, how do you think that makes mom feel? Or what do you think that person was thinking when you did that? There's definitely kids that are at, too young of an age, either, biologically or just developmentally, where they're not there yet. And so if your child does not have that ability to kind of see things from another's point of view, which is not going to be until, they're at least 5 or 6 years old when it first starts. And then, depending on your child, it can be years later, which is obviously totally fine. We just want to make sure we're not expecting too much of them. So making sure that they have that ability to see another's point of view is important before we're expecting it. And that kind of also comes into play a lot when we're talking about, adolescence, like we just were with those higher level things. They're probably more likely to be able to see things from another's point of view, but we want to make sure that we're kind of talking to them about it and asking them and, almost quizzing them away in a way, like, how do you, outside of that emotional scenario, once again, how do you think so and so saw this situation, and seeing if they're even getting it, correct on just that plain view. Are they getting the answer right, or are they actually not able to see things from another perspective? And that's that theory of mind that's definitely important when we're trying to see if those emotional reactions are even a little more understandable than maybe they would be before. Okay, so that was kind of a lot, and I'm sorry if I spoke a little fast, but I just wanted to get you guys, a lot of information out there. So I think what I can do now is kind of start, I'll start in the chat box down here. I think I can see everything. Yes, I can scroll up. Okay, so I'll go through these questions one by one, and you can always schedule a free consultation with me or with another expert in the app so that you can really, get input on your personal situations with your family. Most of us have those free consultations so that you can kind of get a feel for what we do, and if you want to continue with full sessions and services. So I guess I'll just go through and read these. So Kelly said, what can you do to help an 8-year-old child that is always getting in trouble at school? So I think a lot of, I'm sure a lot of these, when they're more personal to your families, I think probably what I'm going to say a lot, which, might be kind of frustrating, but, it all depends on the situation and the kid and kind of why they're getting in trouble in school. So once again, it comes down to the motivation behind behavior and the function, and, is he getting in, and it also comes down to that can't do versus won't do. Is he getting in trouble in school because something's too hard for him? So it totally depends, and I'd have to have a little more information, but you definitely want to work closely with your child's team at school to identify those more specific things. And then maybe some of the information that I gave you tonight about those antecedent strategies hopefully would help, because then you can work with your child's school to, put some of those interventions in place beforehand. So if it's a matter of getting upset over transitions, they can use visual schedules. If it's an attention thing, you can work with them on, different attention-based strategies. But, it would always just depend. The next one says, my daughter, and I'm just going to read these out loud, I guess, just so everybody can kind of, get the same information. I'll try not to read any identifying information. About to be 5, most likely ADHD, working on diagnosis. never taught how to handle emotions very well. Trying to help her, she gets so angry and frustrated and screams, hits, bites, scratches. Breathing and counting doesn't work with her, and you can't tell her no, not even with explaining why we said no. She goes on and on when she doesn't get her way. She also doesn't seem to be in the same space when she is having her big emotions. Okay, so this is a good point. This is important. It kind of goes back to when we're talking about the can't do versus won't do type thing. So, you're saying you can't tell her no, even when you're explaining why you said no. That kind of goes back to she's probably not, like you said, at the point where she's able to even hear that, especially in the moment. So that's when those different lessons and stuff outside of the emotional scenario come into play. It'll be more important to talk to her about that kind of stuff when she's not in that heightened state. And I know it's hard because as adults, like we're gonna react as well, and it's gonna get heightened for us too. But so it'll be better for everybody to kind of do it outside of there. And if those certain strategies don't work, there's definitely other things that you can try in the moment. But I think most importantly, those antecedent type things. So a big thing that we can do is identify precursor behaviors. So if there's any way that you can kind of see those bigger things like hitting and scratching and yelling and crying, if there's anything that happens beforehand, those are important to identify, because that's when we will actually be the most productive if we jump in at that point, so that we're not reinforcing and giving attention and kind of talking through and heightening those bigger things. We're trying to relax the person beforehand and giving them those coping strategies beforehand.
Like they fake the people out.
Let's see.
Oh, it makes you.
I don't know how to get her during the emotions of angry and frustrated. We tried OT. She's also very mean to her sister. I'm sorry, there's a couple of people writing different things. Let's see.
Oops, what's happening here? Hello?
Hi, I do hear you.
Oh, sorry.
You're fine. If you have a question, you can go ahead. Oh, I think, did you write one right here? How do you deal with a teenager that acts like they don't care when they get in trouble? That was you?
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, it wasn't
Okay.
posting.
No, you're fine. Yeah, and this whole last half hour, you're totally good to turn on your mics and ask, questions one at a time. So, what kind of things is he getting in trouble for? Is it, like school type stuff, or like not listening at home?
More home stuff.
Okay. So, acting like he doesn't care. Once again, we're gonna look at those motivations. So, if he's motivated by, obviously a lot of kids and teenagers, electronics, video game time, this and that. Sometimes even though we want them to be at that emotional point where we want them to just, care that, that they did something, maybe not appropriate or wrong, in our eyes, it also they just might not be at that point yet where they do. And so that extrinsic motivation and things might have to be brought into play until they're, emotionally and developmentally at the point where they do care about the behavior itself. So that's when, you have to start using things like the things they do care about to really address that. So, I'm a big believer in reinforcement rather than punishment. So if he's big into video games or having his phone or things like that, having kids earn that type of stuff, and even if it's not earning, but even just, they have to maintain a certain expectation of behavior in order to keep having those things. Just because, like I said, they might not emotionally be at that point where they necessarily can identify that their behavior has a bigger effect or something like that. So that extrinsic stuff might come into play as well in terms of, using the things he cares about kind of to your advantage, even if it doesn't seem super related in your eyes.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see. If anyone else wants to turn their mic on and ask a question, that's definitely okay too.
I would like to ask a question.
Sure.
So 3 years old is having difficulties managing his anger. And I was wondering what would be the red flag for this age to seek an extra help and diagnose.
Okay, that's a good question. Because obviously, 2 and 3-year-olds, we see a lot of things that can be seen as anger and definitely those tantrums and things like that. I would say that it's important to kind of take note of where his communication is at. So not only do we want to look at those behaviors that we want to reduce, but we want to look at those.
So it's all lagging.
Oh, I think someone's mic is on. We want to look at that functional stuff. So how is his communication otherwise besides the tantrums? Is he able to express his wants and needs? Is he able to, tolerate certain things throughout his day that would kind of be expected of his age if he were put into, say, a preschool setting? But if it seems like he does have that communication and he's still kind of just lashing out, then I could see, maybe seeking some help, even just for some strategies in terms of your reaction to that and like maybe what you can do in his environment to address those things if it's not a communication deficit for him. Hopefully I got all the ones in the comments. I know I have some people moderating for me, so let me know if I missed anything important. If anyone else wants to throw their mic on, go ahead.
I would like to know, what do we do? What is the best thing to do when our child is throwing a tantrum in public? Or what is the best approach?
Okay, that's a good question. So in public, ideally the best thing to do would be to try to do what you would do in any other setting, meaning, if it's for, say, like the motivation is that tangible item. So say at home, they're normally throwing a tantrum to, get a certain toy or a certain snack or something. If they're doing that in public to attain those same types of things. So say they're in a store and they're, throwing a tantrum because they want the candy off the shelf. As difficult as it is, the best thing to do is to still make sure that you're addressing that function by not reinforcing that function. So, basically not giving them what they want. So, because as hard as it is, you don't want it to happen, 10 times more in the future by giving into it like that. It's okay to do other things as long as it doesn't match up with that function. So if it is just about, a snack or something, it's okay to use that attention and that soothing type stuff to try to kind of redirect them to, more appropriate behavior, redirect them to something else in the store or something like that. So that as long as you're not giving them that exact thing, as long as you're doing a different type of reaction, then you can at least, be doing your best to make sure it's not happening more in the future. Because that's really what it comes down to, as hard as it is when kids are out in public and that's happening. And as much as it's kind of like panic mode for us as adults too, the most important thing is that we're not making it worse for our future selves and our kids' future selves. And we don't want that to maintain and get more intense, especially as kids get bigger and, tantrums get a little more even, unsafe.